both characters on the Reclaimers podcast, which focuses on healing from coercive control, manipulated attachment, gaslighting, and all forms of intimate partner violence. As we talk about that, they're empowering tools that are introduced by the characters and demonstrated. Those can be found at our website, www.empowering.tools. And the Reclaimers podcast can also be found there. Today, we are talking about episode 213A, Mycroft's Little Trooper. This is an incredibly tricky episode to discuss. There's a lot of information in it, but there's a lot of demonstrated emotional abuse that could be very triggering. So we are here talking with me. I'm Kate. I play Seffi. And we're also talking with Stephen Kerr, who plays Senator Mycroft Daniels. As we set out to record this season, one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate to the world, just as a personal thing, was how wonderfully loving and brilliant Stephen is as a human. So that's partially what these discussions are about. But the other thing that I wanted to do was take the episodes apart for those who are a little bit triggered. I realized that in demonstrating abuse on a podcast like this with something in your ear, that's going to be very tricky to move forward with. So that was a goal of the Empowering Tools Coalition, was to provide tools, discussion questions, and resources. If you are listening to this right now and you would like to discuss the episode more, no matter when you're listening to it, whether it's a day after it was released or a year after it was released, please join us in the Reclaimers Haven, which is a Facebook group just for our podcast and for the creators. And the three of us on the recording right now actually discuss things from the podcast and concepts and tools, things like that within that group. So feel free to join that community. That leads me to the third person on the recording right now, and that is Dianna Graham. Dianna plays Judge Nina Day, and we will actually get to her character in the last episode of this season. Before right now, she is playing a listener, host, question asker, brilliant discussion artist. What do we call you? Yeah, I like all of those. Aw, I think Stephen and I are both fans of you. All right. So with that said, my first question that I have for Stephen is just a little bit of, when we set out to record this episode, there were a couple of spaces where you could have shied away from the character, from what was happening in the episode, and you didn't. What drives you to portray this character so accurately?
Well, I think it's really important. Well, it was important for me to be able to create something that was believable to the audience. I think that's always important when you're telling a story, whether it's on stage or in this podcast, is that it has to be something that people can relate to, and it has to be believable.
So the question of why she stays. I think that this is a big question. This is something that we discussed not only as an Empowering Tools Coalition, but something that we looked at last year with the writing team. Some of the writing team are exceptionally, they're just exceedingly new to this whole idea of emotional abuse being something that binds people. The idea of Stockholm Syndrome, as people understand it, existing in everyday situations and everyday interactions between people who are not husband and wife, not romantically linked. And, I say husband and wife, but partner and partner, wife and wife, husband and husband, that there are a lot of different dynamics in play there. But that when you can't leverage the romance of something, how do you leverage someone's loyalty to the fact that they stay? And I think that that's a really interesting piece. In the beginning of the season, we don't even see it coming. That for the first 4 or 5 episodes where we have experienced this Mycroft-Seffi dynamic, we don't hear the tiny seeds that he's laying until we get to this point. So the trauma bonding, the mind control, the gaslighting, and even he's using neuro-linguistic programming in his favor. And as he's using these mind control pieces where he's continually suggesting to her, you're my most brilliant student, thereby isolating her with that compliment. It's not a compliment that helps her feel unified and connected to everyone in her life. It's saying, no, you are far and away above everyone else, and therefore you are only for me. That everything he's doing, he is taking from her to objectify her. There's not a moment where he is saying, I relate to you on a person-to-person level. Everything is what she can do for him or what he can do for her. And in the beginning, he focuses on that, what he can do for her, to the point that it becomes uncomfortable. That you hear that in the praise that he gives her, especially when she brings Feeney with her, that he's heaping on this praise that feels so undeserving at the time. But you're listening to him and you're thinking, well, we like this character, so of course, but we don't even see that as a measure of his future control of her, that he has so far ingrained. And you imagine these representations of, this 5-episode arc that we've had before this moment. These representations or these episodes represent hundreds of tiny interactions over months and months of time spent together. At the point that he's talking about this, he's saying that there are 440 something, I will leave it at that, 440 something interactions they've had that day alone, and this is normal to her. This is not something that she's calling out or saying this is so far outside the norm. She's saying, I'm having trouble doing what you want me to do, but she's not saying I'm having trouble being here 440 something times. So there's all of those things that are in play, but then on top of that, he has this carrot in front of her that is the encampment. And that's a mask that he's using as a carrot of his approval. He refuses to give her the approval. And many people think that that's slight against, Sephi not being able to be strong enough to walk out of there. When any of us in a dynamic like this, anyone put in these circumstances, anyone deceived to be praised that much and then to have no praise whatsoever, any of us would fall into that category. And all of that's called trauma bonding. And that is referred to in the book called The Betrayal Bond by Patrick Carnes. It's a brilliant book. If you're listening to this and you really want a great book that tells you how those bonds are formed and why Stockholm Syndrome takes just a few days to put together, why you can have someone who spends like 12 hours with a kidnapper and suddenly loves them more than they love their whole family and friends group. This is a great book to describe that.
Wow. Okay.
Long-winded answer. I'm interested to hear other thoughts.
It's a great answer. And I think one of the things that kept popping in my mind while you were talking about, even though the last thing you said maybe, that I was like, you said these 5 episodes, they've had tons and tons of interaction prior to this. And I'm sure that these relationships are a little bit like the camel sneaking into the tent in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're just, it's little by little by little. And before you know it, you're there, and it's extremely difficult to leave at that point, and then of course you must have these narratives. And of course, anyway, so trauma bonding, very fascinating and humbling topic, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to point out too is that Mycroft is looking and is targeting a certain background. And it appears that Percy has issues of abandonment that he can exploit and manipulate. But that's not always the case. There are some things where you have perfectly supportive people surrounding you. And I have known many women who have had 2 very supportive parents in their life, and they will get caught up with a master deceiver who then manipulates them into an abusive relationship. I've known many men who have had that situation. So this is not something where you can just say, oh, a person with a traumatic background, or a person with a weak personality, or a person who doesn't have boundaries. It doesn't work that way. So, yeah.
So I'm interested in knowing, based in reaction to what Kate is saying, Stephen, a lot of this has rung true for you. You've kind of communicated, and do you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about, I don't know, that question, that question that I started with, why does she stay? Why does she stay? Have you ever asked that question, and can you relate? Anyway, what are some of the thoughts that are coming to your mind as you're listening to this and thinking about it?
So it's interesting. I had the opportunity to be with my daughter that that I've referenced before, that has experienced this similar type of abuse, and we were together 2 nights ago, and I said, "Do you think you would be open to listening to this episode?" And she was. So we sat down and we listened to the entire episode together. And what was interesting was to watch her body language, and to listen to her react, and to hear her verbalize during the episode about things that rung true to her, and to have her go, "Oh, this is exactly how it was, and this is exactly what I did." Like, while the episode was occurring, seeing her being uncomfortable, but also she's in a much better place now than she was. This has gone on over at least, I'd say, 20 years of her life that can be aware of, and so she's in a much healthier spot right now. So she was aware of the cycles. She could hear it in the episode. She was like, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly what happens." And even towards the end of the episode, when she was getting really angry at Mycroft, not me, but really angry at Mycroft, you could just see, she was like, "Oh, and here he goes. He's circling back. He's circling back. This is exactly what happens while it's happening." She was verbalizing these things. It was just powerful to sit with her and to have her talk about just how it's so easy to get kind of sucked in to being like Sephi in those moments, and to fall into those traps. So hard, so very hard. And so grateful that she's in a much stronger place today. But it was helpful for her to be able to listen and to recognize kind of the pattern and the language, and to realize how damaging it is. And also to think, why does she stay? Why does Sephi stay?
Yeah.
Was she able to handle herself with grace? Because I think that's part of that question. I mean, that is, was she able to be gentle with her victim self and
Absolutely. I would say yes. It is not. It has not been easy for her, but and it's certainly through years and years of counseling, she is in a much healthier place. And I will say that she has moved into this really great place to where she is now taken her journey and has now moved into kind of a life coach.
Mm-hmm.
So she has moved into kind of taking what she's learned, and it's for other reasons,
Mm-hmm.
but she's using that, what she's gone through, to be able to help other people.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fabulous.
Why write such difficult material? Why even have this be part of a healing podcast, especially when this will be triggering to listeners? Kate, why was this so important for you to write? Why do you have to do this to us?
We, as an Empowering Tools Coalition, as the group that is responsible for the empowering tools for why this exists to begin with, we went around and around and around with this idea and whether or not to actually include this as an arc in a season. Do we include scattering of it where Percy just sort of remembers this once in a while throughout like all of the seasons? Or is this something that we just do in a concentrated effort? As the purpose of the empowering tools is to help people feel supported and empowered, that is the first thing, is that we wanted people to know that they weren't alone. We wanted them to hear what it actually felt like, because this abuse is not only based in deception, where it's hard to recognize it for yourself when you're in the middle of it, but it's also based in isolation. Abusers like Mycroft and so many other emotional manipulators try to divide and isolate prior to committing acts of gaslighting and coercive control. And so that isolation causes a great deal of shame about coming out and talking about it. How tricky is it for Percy, even 20 years in the future? She breaks down and says, I really needed that degree. And that's why, like, that's one of the first episodes we hear from Percy. And her emotional response to this whole abuse cycle is, I really needed the degree. That's how she justifies this to other people. She can't even say, he gaslighted me, and she can't even pointedly describe all of the circumstances surrounding it. How does she say he claimed to have a memory problem and then pretended not to? Like, how do you explain how damaging and difficult that is? She can't ever tell anyone about the 447 versus 448. How is she going to explain what that meant to her? She can't ever explain that her laughter has an impact on him, that her happiness and her friendship with Phoenix is called into question. How do you explain those things and have them be demonstrated in a way that would have someone go, oh, that absolutely is traumatizing. So that was the first effort. The second was, we wanted people who have loved ones who doubt them. There are a lot of survivors that leave a horrible relationship like this, and they tell their loved ones, and their loved ones go, really? It takes two to tango. Really, you just should have gotten out of that a long time ago. Really, why are you still hanging around them? Really, what's your problem? Like, there's so much blame from people who are otherwise well-meaning. So to have a lack of belief on something as big as something this traumatizing, and to have a way to take that to other listener, or take that from a listener to a family member and have them say, this is what I went through. We wanted to demonstrate that. We wanted to show that that is, this is how it happens. This is what it looks like. And if you follow along the microcephaly arc, you get to see instances where he plays up these things. And then in this episode, this is where we first see him use that against her. So that is really demonstrable for people who are otherwise prevented from actually being angry or upset about what actually happened to them. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Stephen, any more?
No, I was just going to say, as I was listening to that, I'm thinking, I remember going through the same thing as a parent, where I would think to myself, why doesn't she just stop with this relationship? Why doesn't she just end it? And I remember thinking, it just seems so clear to me that all she needs to do is just like not continue to have a relationship there. She has every time that she engages there, she gets hurt, Why does she, and it just seems so easy for me at times. And I'm going back like 15 years ago when this was new, 15, 20 years ago when it was new to me. It's like, geez, this just seems so easy. You know, she's hurt. Just end it.
Yeah.
I didn't know the complexity of it at the time. And it took me years and years of understanding kind of what for her, how and understanding the complexity of a narcissist, and just how difficult it really and truly is, especially in her case as a teenager. I didn't understand. And then as a young adult, and then as an adult, there's just so many layers to it. So it took a while, and it's still, even to this day, I mean, it's not over. It continues in varying degrees to this day. And so I have to continually, take a deep breath when I see things and I'm like, take a deep breath.
Go at her pace. Yeah.
So it is challenging. So I can totally see what you're saying, Kate, in that why it's so important to show these things to family members and things to help people to understand and see things. And the complexity of this, because it is not easy. It is not easy if you're not the one that is going through it to understand. So if we can shine a light on it, I think that's helpful.
I think that every survivor confronts that moment where their current completely detached self confronts, as you called, their victim self, where they were in that moment. And that's the thing, is that all of us can plop ourselves into Sephi's circumstances and say, this is how I would handle it. But we've been able to detach from every single interaction that she's had with him. She has not been allowed to stop seeing him. She has not had any no contact moment from him. The constant contact that he requires of her, and the constant check-in and desire for approval, and she is his research assistant. I mean, there's so many things. And even in the last episode where she says, we don't know what it was like to work with Carl Jung or Freud. We don't know what they were like in person. We just know that they came up with brilliant material. And so clearly he has brilliant material. Like, she's making those excuses for him when she is not with him, which is an important part of that too. But we've all been given the break from it. She hasn't. And I think that's one of the most important things. She's also, if we're looking at deception levels, we're clear on this. We know who this guy is. We were told who this guy was in season 1. But she's in deception level 27 out of 10 right now. She's so deceived, and she can't even see it clearly when he's talking about, this is what it looks like to be manipulated, and you're manipulating me, she can't even see that projection is so clear. She's studying an undergrad at Harvard from an abnormal psychology professor that the university clearly condones, Do we spend a lot of our time questioning those authority figures in our lives? There's a lot of
really good question
shifting there. So anyway,
what should be a safe space, and we trust those certain conventions, and oh my gosh. Okay. I have a couple specific little ones. I love you guys, and I appreciate so much everything that you share. Why does Mycraft get so mad before Steffi laughs? And why is her laughter bother him? I mean, I think this also ties in. What's the skinny with them? What is his problem with the numbers? I mean, let's just pick on him a bit. I want to know why the heck he's so freaking controlling about that damn number, and why does it bother him for her to laugh? Why is he? Who wants to go first?
I'm gonna let Stephen take this one, because I know that there were, interaction with the script and everything else. It's not like we spent tons of character time making that decision. But there were some things that Stephen just instinctively ran to in those moments. And I was like, dang, go, dude.
He knows.
Yeah, let's read this. Let's eat it alive.
No, I just think that what I played off of was anything that was anything where there was that was an attack or anything that would put into question anything about my character, my integrity, anything about me would set me off. You just don't do that. You have no position. You have no authority, Sephi, to be in that position to question anything that I do. And the minute that you do, I'm going to put you in your place right away. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to do that with my voice. And I'm going to show that through anger, and I'm going to make you feel it. And so that's kind of how I approached it, was from that aspect. I want you to feel it. I want you to hurt. I want you to feel something uncomfortable, so that I can be in control, that I can have power, so that I can take control of the situation. That's from a character standpoint. That's kind of how I saw the character development and the story, and how I would approach it, or how I approached it. So, Kate, there was that, your
that played
writing the character.
For sure. Anything that she questioned, anything where she could demonstrate that she could have an independent thought of her own at this point, where she could say, I could use this to break free of that hypnosis that you've got me under. So her laughing at him meant that they could have a realistic, authentic connection. He wasn't up for that. I think the other word we have not used enough between the three of us, which is weird, but conditioning. He is 100% conditioning her. And, you talk about that pain prior to on the podcast. We haven't addressed it specifically this season, but we did last season, where we talked about the pain rescue cycle, that narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths set people up to experience pain in their presence, so that the narcissist or sociopath or psychopath can be the person to actually give the comfort for the pain, so that we learn to go back to them. As a survivor, as a victim, we learn to go back to them for the pain, and then go back to them for the comfort. That it's never a moment of, and I think that played out so well here by you making that acting choice, because that allowed me to make the choice of, okay, well, now aren't you going to comfort me? Like, isn't there, why aren't you doing the nice thing now? Why are you continuing to be this rageaholic? Like, what is going on with you?
Yeah. And it was so, what was interesting, and what I, in that moment there in the writing, where towards the end of this particular episode, when Mycroft finally does then come back, and as just all of this, oh man, he's back to the cycle of back to just, oh, I care for you, and oh, Sephi, everything's going to be all right, I'm going to take care of you. I don't remember the lines at this point, but basically now he's showing that, oh, I really do care about you, I really do love you. And then he's essentially, totally just, feeding her a bunch of crap, right? Is nothing that he's saying is authentic at all. But it's what she needs at that moment. He's totally being so manipulative at that moment, and that was one of those things that was just so infuriating to listen to again after having been several months since we recorded. It's just like, oh my gosh, listen to him.
Yeah.
Listen to these lines about
his
how awful he is, and now how he's just got her caught back up in the web again, and she's falling right back into his trap all over again. And it's so hard. It's so hard, but that is that's how the cycle goes, and it starts all over again, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so humbling. And you know, that I'm so glad you brought up that word conditioning, and you know, and I'm sorry we hadn't brought it up sooner, you know, because as you were talking about it, as you were talking about it, I was like, it's like he's trying to break a horse, you know. I'm going to punish, reward, punish, reward. I mean, isn't that what they do? You know, you train.
Without any indicator of when the punishment ends or when the reward starts. Like there's never any indicator. It's entirely in his control. And that is something I actually, in having a conversation with a person in my life that I identified to be incredibly toxic. And I can't go into the circumstances of how I got into this conversation with him. That would reveal too much. But I will say that I was surprised by his candor with me. And one of the things that he said is that there is a lot of, he said, it's really euphoric and heady to get to this place where I realize that someone is willing to do anything to get my approval. And I remember hearing him say that, and I just sort of blacked out for a minute because I couldn't imagine someone being that evil, that they had no social contract where they would feel like that mattered, you know. And to hear him say that it was euphoric to have that control over people. I don't know about you two, but when I feel like I have control over someone, I get hives. Like I start to feel weird about the universe. I'm like, okay, what did I do wrong? You know, like that feels weird to me. So the fact that he would say it was euphoric, and I think it's really interesting that Mycroft plays this as a victim. You know, that's and that Stephen chose, you know, I'm going to play this as a victimhood thing.
I want to finish with this question. What should listeners do if they get triggered by this episode? Like we all did.
I actually want to turn to Stephen really quick. And I just want to ask Stephen, in your experience, what has your daughter responded to when you support her? What does that look like, and how does that change things for her? You know, you've clearly been there for her in many ways. What does that look like?
It's being able to listen is the greatest thing that you can do, is allowing them to feel heard, that they have a chance to share, and that they feel that you have listened to them, is probably some of the best things that I know, and from experience, not trying to fix them, not trying to do anything other than just to listen. That comes from experience of doing the opposite, of wanting to try to help, and trying to then go ahead and do the opposite of what I just said. But the more that we can just listen and be there and comfort and allow them to feel understood, is probably the best. Probably the best thing that I can think of is just to be able to hear them, and to be able to repeat back in their language what it is that they've shared, so that they know that you have heard them, what they're experiencing, and then from there if there's something that you can mutually explore together, that's great. But listening is, I think, super important.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's so wonderful.
That
Kate. Yeah.
I just wish that I could give every survivor that.
Yeah.
And it is an unfortunate side effect of so many survivors that when they are in the midst of this type of coercive control and manipulated attachment, that they are isolated from family and friends that they feel like they can actually reach out to. So that becomes an issue. You're spot on with the listening. That's a principle called reverse discourse. I was first introduced to that by Shahida Arabi, who is this brilliant author and researcher. And she talks about it and says that if you've experienced projection at all, having an opportunity to say your side of the story out loud to someone and have someone just accept that side of the story can be more healing than we can possibly imagine. And the other thing that I learned as an advocate, my mentor, when I first started, said, "You're not there to look at events. You are absolutely not there to determine truth. You're not there to play detective. You are not there to play police officer. You are there for the victim. It is 100% your responsibility to give them support." And she didn't say it this way. And in the intervening years, a couple of colleagues and I have come up with this. We do not hinge support for survivors upon belief, that there will be things that we don't know how to believe, but we just have to say, if a survivor tells me that that is so for them, that they experienced it that way, we accept that, because it's more important for them to feel supported than it is for us to charge off to play detective. So those are some important things that I think externally victims and survivors can feel and get. For any person who's listening right now and is isolated and feels like they don't have that support from other people in their life, I would encourage you that when you think back on these stories of blame shifting and projection, when you think back on the abuse that you've experienced, that you find a way to use your voice, that you find a way to write it down in a journal. You find a support group at a local hospital or shelter, that you reach out and you find a way to talk. There's a reason that talk therapy has been our longest lasting mental health resource. But especially in healing gaslighting, getting clear on your reality is going to make a huge difference in your healing. And the sooner you can do that, the sooner that you can talk, whether it's to a journal, a trusted friend, whether it's to a group of strangers. You know, I will say for me, the fantasy tool was the most useful. I used to write very long letters to Mr. Darcy about how I'd been treated, and I counted on his complete frustration with what had happened to me. And I will say that that was very useful. To have a fictional character be enraged on my behalf really helped. So there are plenty of characters out there, though, that I'm certain would be very useful. I just heard from a survivor the other day that she's been writing letters to Edward Cullen. So, I mean, you do what you gotta.
Yeah, you gotta.
And I think that the fantasy tool in that way can be something that is useful in those moments of isolation. As you build that up, you can imagine that other people are enraged for you, and that can have a huge impact on your healing. Yeah. And I am so grateful that Stephen brought up listening, because I think that there are probably people listening right now who want to help and don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that listening is one of the rarest currencies in the world.
Fantastic.
That listening with an ear to support and not to do or to action or to change, but just listen to support, that is an action, that is a change, that is so, so important. And like you, Stephen, I learned that one the hard way. Yeah.
So I appreciate what you said, Stephen, about empathetic listening and that reminder to not try to fix things. And I think about these fantasy tools that you're talking about in the journal and writing, that ideally, if we can find trusted sources, whether it's a support group or a hotline or, a safe friend, that's a wonderful thing. But in moments of crisis where you don't have that option for the time, you can practice a little bit of self empathy. Yeah.
That is one more recommendation that I have, actually, is after listening to this episode, we structured the season so that there are several Feeney episodes that you can go back and listen to that have invitations out of symptom land. That if you get triggered into symptom land in this episode, you can go back to the Feeney Rose episode 203. You can go back to 211 and 212 and actually hear moments of Feeney interacting with these people. And you can listen to Rose confront her abuser and how she does that, and how Feeney and Truman talk to her. There are comforting things in there that we plugged into the season before this episode, so that those were available for people to go back to. So
I'm so glad you mentioned that.
That's another trigger helper.
That was an exhilarating episode. That was like, yes. What a payoff. Well, thank you for letting me, thanks for letting me throw these questions out at y'all.
Stephen, any last thoughts? Any final thoughts? Anything that you would want to say to someone listening to this and they are like completely, I don't know, triggered, freaked out, whatever?
Just know that there's hope.
There is hope.
There is hope. And it's just around the corner. So even though this episode is very triggering, there are good things that will be coming soon
in this season.
Not to give too much away, but there is hope. And I think that's important just in general, is that I think if we just can hold on to hope, I think that's super important. It's a good thing for all of us to remember.